Hello and welcome to MikroTik Universe or Maximum Transmit Unit podcast or Meģis Talks with users. So it's still up in the air to decide which one it is. And today, after months of preparation, we can finally have episode number 2. 8-hour difference didn't help to organize this, but here we are with one of our, I would say, brightest personalities from the other side of the pond, from the US, Kevin Myers. Welcome.
Thank you. I appreciate the invite to come record this podcast. This is fantastic.
Yeah, so maybe then a short introduction, who you are, what are you doing?
Sure. So my name is Kevin Myers. I'm a co-founder of IP Architects and Network Architect. And a brief history on me. I've been in networking for, I guess, 22, 23 years, somewhere around there. And got into MikroTik a while ago, which I'm sure we'll get into and talk about. And we run one of the largest MikroTik consulting firms in the world. We do all kinds of things with MikroTik and with networking in general. But we're very well known for some of the work that we do and we publish with MikroTik. So that's my background.
So I think the first association for me with you were the orange TikToks.
Yes, the orange Tic Tacs. And there's a fun story behind those because I think you and I first met, I believe it was in 2013 in St. Louis, was I believe the first time we met at the US MUM. And we brought the orange Tic Tacs because at the time we were building a TAC, Technical Assistance Center for MikroTik, to help support phone support and things like what you would see with other networking vendors. And it was something that we were building to support. And as we went to get ready to go to the MikroTik MUM, we said, what swag should we bring? What should we have? And we talked through a bunch of things, and we talked about the product that we were going to sell, which was the MikroTik Tac. And we're like, oh wow, that sounds really good. We should get the Tic Tacs. And then the rest is history. And unfortunately, we built a life-size MikroTik Tac container with the orange and the blue, with the MikroTik Tacs, and it got destroyed when we shipped it back from St. Louis to Denver. So now we only have the little Tic Tacs. In fact, I even think I have a.
So yeah, the orange Tic Tacs and orange shirts.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, I have one, but I was not able to locate it for this podcast. Sorry.
Yeah, everybody thinks we're Dutch. We're actually not Dutch, but we the school that I went to, the colors were orange and blue. So.
You would probably blend in a Dutch football fan without any problems. With
absolutely.
Yeah. So every year, starting from 2013, I think your team become bigger and bigger. So how many people are there already?
So I think we're around 20 or so right now, and we're hiring more engineers this year. We went from really 2 people, 3 people into over 20 now that are scattered throughout the world. We have people in Europe, people in South America, people in the US, and offices there as well. So it's been a lot of growth for us in the last 10 years. It's been a very, very interesting journey.
Mm-hmm. So, but okay, MikroTik was not around all the time. So probably you started your networking stuff with something else or computer stuff. So how did you get in? I also know that you have other career in a law enforcement.
That's right. So yeah, once upon a time, I was a cop. And I've always been in networking, so that was part-time for me when I was a cop. But my background goes really before professionally all the way back when I was very little. When I was 5 or 6, we had a TI 99 computer in the early 80s that did TI Basic, and that's where I first learned to code. And at the time, I was just typing what I could see in a programming magazine. I wasn't really, coming up with my own code. But we had a cassette tape recorder, because we didn't have disk drives. And we saved the programs on a cassette tape. And this is 1983, 1984, something like that. And so that's where I first sparked my interest in computers. And then that got into x86 in the later 80s when that became very popular, and a 2400 baud modem to connect to the internet. And that eventually got me into the late 90s, which is when I started IT professionally. And I started working for a small company doing jack of all trades, where I was working on We had Cisco routers and switches, and we had Windows computers and a bunch of different things. We even had Novell NetWare, and I think we had some Token Ring, a little bit of Token Ring left. So I got in right at the end of Token Ring and the beginning of Ethernet and all of that. But the journey that took me into getting into networking very heavily wouldn't be until about, I guess, 10 years into my IT career. I spent about 10 years as an IT generalist working on computers and servers and a little bit of networking. And then I started working for a telco. And that's where I really learned more advanced networking, because up until then, I mean, I thought it was very impressive to be able to, put a VLAN on a port, until then. But then I learned subnetting and routing and BGP and MPLS. And that's what ultimately got me into MikroTik, actually, because the company that I work for, the telco that I work for, found MikroTik. And they brought it in. And that's when I first started going to MUMs and doing the MikroTik training.
So how far apart was the first exposure to MikroTik and actually first user meeting, or did it came more or less at the same time?
That was very close, because once we started using MikroTik, the company wanted us to go to the MUM and to go to do the training. And so that all happened, I think, within a year of discovering MikroTik. So it was very, very close from that time frame that we went off to go do the training. And interestingly enough, I had never really intended to start a company, but when we went to the training, we found out after we completed our MikroTik certification that you could apply to be a consultant and have your name on the consultants list. And so we did. And at first I thought, maybe I'll make a few extra dollars, to at the time my car was very old. So I thought maybe I'll be able to buy a newer car and make a few extra dollars. And so that's what I did. And suddenly I got all these requests coming in. And hey, we have MikroTik routers, and we're in Spain, and we want help migrating our data center. And we have MikroTik routers, and we're an ISP, and we want your help building a MikroTik core. And so I realized very quickly that this was a very unique opportunity to really do something that was very different than what I was used to doing, which was going to work every day and working for somebody else.
What was your first training class? Who was the teacher?
So that was with LinkTex, with Dennis Burgess. I met Dennis and his team in St. Louis in 2013, and that's where I went and did my very first MikroTik training.
So you did with MikroTik only train the trainers, right?
Right. So you and I didn't do train the trainer until 3 years later, when I think I took the class from you in 2015 in Miami. I think we were down in South Beach, and I took the class there
with all the hurricane warning.
Yes, exactly. With all of that. And it was actually it was pretty awful, because you guys chose a hotel that looked over the beach and all the palm trees and the drinks. And so we sat for a week learning MikroTik training while we stared at the beach and the palm trees. So I know that was on purpose that you made that choice.
And every evening I gave you additional tasks to make your life harder, so you cannot go relax in the beach in the evenings.
Exactly.
Yeah. Now, currently, I can say you that emails from IP architects have a special treatment here in office. It's not just a regular email. That means that you actually have to already have your morning coffee, already have mental preparation ready, just to dig into the emails from you or from few of your colleagues, because you go deep, guys, when you actually write something to us, which is not so often. I just checked, because you write only those things that you are 100% sure, as far as I noticed. But you really, basically, sometimes we even have to go straight to developers with the description that you have, which is precision that we can. If there would be all clients would have such a precision as you guys, we would probably end up without job in support.
Well, I think we had a little practice in the networking side working with MikroTik, but we try to do our best to get the things we send to you to be very complete and accurate, and have drawings and documents and subout.riffs and all of those good things.
Yeah. So I just wanted you to maybe explain to our audience what does it take, maybe not going into really complicated networking setup, but to submit a properly prepared support ticket to MikroTik, and how long this usually takes for you to get a reply or get that fixed from your experience.
So I'll actually tell this story across the 10 years or so, 11 years that I've been working with MikroTik, because definitely as we have grown, so has MikroTik. And so one of the things we noticed when we first started working with MikroTik is obviously, like you said, when we're recording this, there's an 8-hour time gap. And if you're further west in the US, if you're on the West Coast or you're in Hawaii, something like that, it's even worse. And so one of the things we noticed is that in order to make it as efficient for us as we could, we wanted to get as much information the first time to you so that we didn't spend a lot of time going back and forth and waiting across the time gap. So that was one of the first things we noticed, is that getting more complete information helped with the time gap. The other thing that we noticed is that, and this isn't unique to MikroTik, I think other networking vendors do the same thing, is that obviously you want to know what version did you try this on? Are you on a version that's 5 years old that's maybe had some improvements and some bug fixes? So the first thing that we try to do is test it on all the available versions. We usually test it on long term. We'll test it on the development version. If there's a beta version, we'll test it on the beta version. And so typically when I submit, I think there's some stuff for RouterOS version 7, some things that I submitted in MPLS and a couple other things that we documented a behavior. And so I tried it in all the available versions to see if the behavior was any different, so that when you guys receive it, it's okay. We don't have to ask for the latest because it's been tested in the latest, and we don't have to try it in another version because that's already been tested. So I think that speeds up the process as well. And the other thing that I try to do is do a network diagram, because I know, being a consultant, people send us networks that are on fire all the time that we'll get into, and you don't know what they look like, and there's no network documentation, and you have no idea what is what. So I know that it makes it a lot easier and more efficient to troubleshoot the problem if you have a very detailed drawing to see what do the routers look like, what do the switches look like.
And many times in process of drawing that diagram, clients solve his problem himself.
Yes, I've done that. As I've drawn the diagram out, I think one time I was gonna send you guys something, and I was like, oh, I'm on the wrong port. That's my problem. I have the cable on the wrong port. But that's my strategy, is to try to be as complete as possible and give you guys the tools to be able to quickly look at it and realize, okay, this is probably something that we need to look at, and it's not a configuration problem.
Also, sometimes we use you guys. So we sometimes write a request for you, because there's a unique situation for us, because we have lots of different equipment around here, but it's all for testing. It's not in actual networks. So if we have devices from other manufacturers and so on, they are like limited configuration on them, not the actual deployments, in which is very useful to have somebody who has that MikroTik other vendor system going on somewhere, and it can solve lots of questions. For example, the same RFC can be implemented different ways in code, and sometimes when you read it through, you think you implemented it the only right way, but it turns out that somebody else has implemented the same code before that RFC was finished, and it looks completely different, so the two things doesn't work together. So
that's very, very common, especially in routing protocols. I think that's the one we see. BGP, OSPF, every vendor has their non-RFC compliant things that they like to add to BGP and OSPF and other things. And so
but in many cases the RFC was not there yet when Cisco decided to implement something, or Juniper or some other vendors also. Because
that's true. And then they may revise the RFC. It may get revised later, and you may implement one version of it, and they may revise the RFC later. And that's you see that all the time. But we do try to do a lot of interop testing, because in networking, there's always going to be a mix of different vendors, that are out there. And so making sure that everything works with all the different vendors. I think that's a blog series that we started very early, was testing MikroTik with different vendors, not only to make sure that it worked, but also it was easier for people that were coming from different backgrounds of different vendors, whatever syntax they learned. So we kind of wrote a cheat sheet to say, if this is what BGP looks like on this router, this is what it looks like in MikroTik. And that's been very helpful, because I think that makes it easier for people to get into MikroTik if they haven't been exposed to it.
There is a big topic going on both on Reddit and also on our forums, that we stand apart from the regular implementation of configuration of routing protocols. Especially the latest routing filters in version 7 was the pinnacle of the discussion lately. So what's your thought on that one?
That's been brought up a lot. I think, in fact, this is even a couple of people on my team asked me to bring up the routing filters because the routing filters are incredibly powerful. As I've tested them, there's things that we can do. You can do that not even like a Juniper router, for example, can do. There was one specific case where we were struggling to be able to match BGP med in a range. So it's it's fairly simple to match a specific value or match a value that's greater than or less than. But one of the things we found that we really couldn't do that wasn't easy to do was match a range of med. And you can do that in the RouterOS routing filters. And so they're incredibly powerful. But as the syntax is definitely a big change from where it's been. So I think if you were to ask my personal wish list, I would love to see something between the old routing filters and the new routing filters as far as the syntax, because I know for me, I'm not a programmer. I haven't compiled code successfully since the 1990s on a Unix mainframe. I'm just not a coding person. I'm a routing and switching guy. And I think that there's a lot of people in networking that like the ability to be able to use context sensitive help in the CLI and to be able to not be as programmatic about it when you're building the CLI. So I think if I were to have my wish list on that, I'd like to see a little bit of syntax change to make it easier to use and some context sensitive help. But the fact that you can do almost anything with it is fantastic.
Maybe the better inline help assistance would help.
The help, being able to tab or question mark on commands, and not just the commands, but the syntax would help quite a bit. That would be a big step.
Yeah, because it's in our to-do list, but first we need to kind of finalize development of that part, and when it's set in stone, then we should make a tab, because you have to recreate that tab feature every time you change syntax.
Right.
And so on. So yeah. So while we are at the topic, so there's different RouterOS versions around. So we have long-term, we have testing, we have stable, and we have version 6 and version 7. What actually are you using where? Because, for example, like we as a MikroTik employees, we are always on the bleeding edge, everywhere. At home, at the relatives' houses, in the networking, and so on. We even sometimes suffer from connection loss in the office because of this being on the edge. But yeah, what's your take on it, and what do you maybe would suggest for others to stick to?
Yeah. I'll give you the advice that I always give clients that come to us that want to build MikroTik networks. So I'll go from the most stable. If you're going from the most stable, we will always recommend 648.6 long term. That is, in our opinion, the most stable version of code that is out there right now. So if stability and consistency is the most important thing, then 648.6 on long term is what we'll usually recommend. And I will say that's changing for clients as they get into V7 and they get more comfortable with V7. We have more production deployments than we've ever had. And so usually I'll ask them what is it? Do you want the new features and the new hardware? And then you just want to wait a few months until the long-term version comes out for version 7? Or do you want to use something that we know is, 100% solid? And the answers vary because, a lot of people they love the new hardware and they love the features of the new OS, but they, have to decide if they want that for their business. So if it's the most critical, I always use 648.6. If it is something that we, can tolerate a few disruptions, then 7.7 stable and 7.6 stable have been generally very good in routing and switching, and MPLS and things like that. VLANs and switching have been good. I think all of those have been pretty solid as we've gotten into the later versions of 7 code. So when it comes to the office, I think I'm running 7.7 now here at the office. I generally don't run the beta versions or the RC versions here at the office, except in the lab. The lab is we have a separate room, as you mentioned, where we have racks and racks full of MikroTik and a bunch of other vendors and hypervisors where we do a lot of testing. So the development lab is, whatever's new, right? Whatever's the latest. But for my office gear, which is all MikroTik, I have MikroTik APs, I have the new HAP AX2s here now, and I have CRS 328 running my core, and RB 5009 is my edge router here at the office. So it's very, very simple branch office type setup because it's not a very big office where I'm at. And so I run 7.7 on most of the hardware there. I also use the L3 hardware offload because I run IPv4 and IPv6 in dual stack at the office. And so the CRS 328, I use the L3 hardware offload of that. That works really well. That's been working well on 7 for quite a while. And at home, I unfortunately, the users at home get subjected to the worst beta and development because I usually will run. It depends. My home network is very complicated. I'll even send you a graphic of it so you can see it. I've built an overlay network on MPLS so that I have a few APs that I don't mess with. That's what the kids and my wife use to do whatever it is that they're doing, and those are audiences. And so generally, I don't mess with those too much, but I do run MPLS and VXLAN over it. And most recently, I built an IPv6 only overlay segment to be able to take advantage of the L3 hardware offloading and V6 IPv6 that you recently added, and then also do VXLAN so that I could build I could actually build an extension of our data center, which is in Denver, Colorado. I'm in Jackson, Mississippi. And we use zero tier to connect to our data center, which MikroTik added recently in version 7, which was phenomenal. Because we have a very close relationship with zero tier too. We know the CEO, we know their C-level team, and we work with zero tier quite a bit too. But so I built this, actually it was just a week ago. I have an SSID that's for our company that goes over VXLAN, over native IPv6, and then I have IPv4 and IPv6 on top of it. And it goes all the way to a zero tier gateway router at the house, which then goes over the internet up to the data center in Denver, hits another zero tier gateway router, which is a CCR 2004. And then that goes into the data center, into various things and labs and equipment that we have set up there. So the home is very much a mix, and I'm always running beta on something there of whatever the latest beta is. So that's kind of generally the mix that we tend to use. I think with Wi-Fi, that's with routing and switching with wired connectivity. With Wi-Fi, if it's production, I'm usually a little less aggressive because I know AX has come out. That's very new. There's still working through things there. So if it needs to be really stable, I'll typically go back to the 6 version and run something, not have all the latest frequencies and the latest features, but otherwise have pretty good stable Wi-Fi connectivity.
So no AX equipment at your house currently?
Oh, actually, no. I have 2 HAP AXs at the house. I have one in my living room and I have one in the kitchen. So I've actually the VTEP for the VXLAN is running on the AX. That's my endpoint. Oh, okay. So all of my APs are actually routers. I don't build them in a layer 2 network. They're all routing with OSPF on dual stack in IPv4 and IPv6, and then all the SSIDs are all overlays, whether it's MPLS or VXLAN. So the HAP AX2 is the endpoint.
Understood. So yeah, we have big changes in the last few years. RouterOS version 7, obviously, the unicorn.
The unicorn.
Yeah, the Americans all really love especially hello Greg, if you're watching. Yeah, he even make a special mug and T-shirt with the version 7 unicorn, and brought every employee, MikroTik employee, to the mom and give that present. I think I gave it to my wife or something. But yeah, it's finally out. Then we also have lots of new hardware coming out. So CRS 2000 series, CRS 500 series, new switch chip series, AX wireless. So what's your favorite hardware change, and why do you like it?
Oh, wow. There's it's a lot to pick from. So I'm going to start with I'm going to tell you my most favorite as a professional network engineer. I think the CCR 2216 was my favorite because it got us 100 gig capability, and it gave us the ability to put something into a network that could compete with the 1U offerings from other network vendors that were 100 gig capable, 25 gig capable of full tables, capable of forwarding in an ASIC. And so that was my favorite professionally because it opened up a whole world, and we have a number of them in prod. And I think as V7 matures, we're going to see a ton of them. And it's gotten a lot better over the last, I'd say, 6 months in trying to stabilize things. There's an ISP that's in Africa that is that runs across a significant part of the country. They're a major country level telecom, and they're running CCR 2216s as their BGP borders, and they're also using a different set of 2216s with the NAT hardware offload as CGNAT gateways. And so we're pushing on any given day we're pushing up to 50 gig of traffic using hardware offload through those 2216s for NAT and for BGP borders. So as a professional network engineer, that's probably my favorite. If I start to look at some of the other things that are out there, I would say my other favorites that have come out, the 2116, because it has the ability to put an NVMe drive in it, and because the container functionality has been recently added, the CCR 2116 has recently become my most favorite router. It's what I use for my home router. And we started to use it as an out of band router a lot in a lot of networks because you can build containers. I think somebody has a net install container now that you can do in Linux. And so it gives you the ability to manage the network with, you put zero tier on it, you can put the net install container, you can put whatever container you want. So the CCR 2116, because of the CPU and memory that it has and the ability to do containers and add an NVMe drive is one of my favorites. I think it's great. I'd love to see more combinations of routers with drives that you can put in. And I would say from just from the perspective of value for the features, the 5009 is also one of my favorites because it's being used in home setups, it's being used for offices, wireless ISPs and fiber ISPs are using it at towers and in cabinets. It's an incredibly powerful router for the money for what you can do with it. So the 5009 is also one of my favorites. And then just from the looks, I love this. I have my HAP AX2 here, and the looks of this. I love what you guys have done with the branding. I think the logo change that MikroTik has done, all the branding and marketing that has been going on and working on the logo, I think is fantastic. So just the looks of it, I think the HAP AX2 is my favorite.
There's actually a funny story about that logo. You will still receive some products with the old logo somewhere just because of all the part shortages and so on that came very unexpectedly, and we might have all the parts except one crucial one for production, and we're just trying to get it for a year, for 2 years, and if we will get it, then suddenly we can produce a device and it will have the old logo. But the logo change mainly was because it was hard to use the old logo on different surfaces and different antennas and everything. We needed something that is much more easier to apply and so on. So this is the main reason for logo change, because I know that there are some people that hate changes like that, but yeah, there was technical necessity for the change. But there might be maybe not cases anymore, but there definitely can be PCBs with the old logo still, and will be for some good time, few years maybe.
I will always like both, but the new logo has grown on me a lot. I don't think I've heard very much negative about the new logo. I think everything I've heard has been very positive.
Yeah, but there are some people that die hard for changes and so on. So yeah, so 5009. It's also one of the controversial products that we have lots of feedback, because basically we tried to combine, as I told you in my video that I was responsible for, we tried to combine lots of things in that one small form factor. And there's only so much things that you can put in, not only with the size-wise and part-wise, but in latest products, heat-wise. So all the components are producing heat, and that case have only so much power to participate it our way. So yeah. So what do you think is missing, or what should be changed in that form factor? Let's say for theoretical RB6011 series or 6009.
I think now this is going to be the routing and switching geek coming out in me. As I understand it, the chipset that was used in there has very, very limited layer 3 forwarding capabilities. If I remember right, I think it's only 100 routes or 200 routes. It's very, very minimal. And I think that what I've seen in the ISP world, because that's where I'd say most of my work is in ISPs. The 5009 is being used at towers, at micropops. It's being used out in the field quite a bit. And now that MikroTik has layer 3 hardware offload capability, I think that having that ability in a 5009 would be my biggest wish list. Is even if the routing table is not very big, even if it's just a few thousand routes, being able to have IPv4 and IPv6 forwarding, and even MPLS would be, I would say that would be my wish list of being able, putting a Marvel chipset into that box that would be able to do those three things, because then you would have everything that every ISP has ever wanted, which is V4 and V6 in hardware, and MPLS, and specifically MPLS PE functionality in hardware. Not just the PE functionality of being able to send the traffic on, but the NCAP decap of a VPLS pseudo wire. Or I don't want to skip ahead to my software wish list, but something like EVPN, SRMPLS, and L2 VPN one day. Things like those in hardware. Those are rapidly becoming standards for ISPs that they're using for MPLS, and even enterprises are starting to use those. You see large enterprises taking some of these protocols, like a VXLAN and EVPN, and putting them together and wanting to be able to do hardware offload. And I've always said, and a bunch of people on my team have said, that if MikroTik comes up with hardware offload for the encapsulation and decapsulation of VXLAN and for MPLS layer 2 services and layer 3 VPNs as well, if that becomes possible, it will be one of the most inexpensive, cost-effective network solutions to be able to attach to any network and be able to deliver those services at wire speed. And I think that's going to be, people are not going to be able to get enough of that. That is something that I've always wanted to see, and I thought is a very natural fit for MikroTik routers, and the 5009 specifically, because it fits in so many places. It's so small. If I'm working in Alaska and we have a very small enclosure at a remote site on a mountain in Alaska that only exists on solar, which is another thing I love about MikroTik. Putting it on solar is better than almost any other vendor. And so if I have a solar powered site in Alaska that I want to be able to put a small router in that can still do MPLS and IPv6 and IPv4 with BGP and OSPF, that's the real unicorn, right? Like we always joke about RouterOS version 7 is the unicorn, but being able to do that is a unicorn right now in networking for the price point that it's at.
But you didn't answer. Okay, you answered one of the features, so hardware offloading.
Hardware offload would be my other feature. I think adding wireless into it would be, having wireless like AX wireless would be helpful. I think you guys have already done the PoE. That was one of the things I wanted to see. You've already come out with a PoE version where it's PoE on all the ports.
Both in and out.
Yes, I saw that.
What's your take on PoE in on multiple ports? And our GPEN solution that we are not pushing, but we're trying to offer people.
I think that's incredibly helpful, because in the space that we work in with ISPs and even in enterprises, this has become, being able to use PoE in and out is incredibly helpful, because it minimizes the amount of equipment that you need. So multiple in on PoE and then being able to pass that through to multiple ports and that's fantastic, because I rely on everything I can PoE power in my lab. I can. So it's funny, because I have one rack in my lab of all the vendor equipment, all the other vendor equipment, and I have, all kinds of power strips. And we sometimes even have to turn off the microwave to make sure it doesn't trip the breaker. And, but with MikroTik, I have a CRS 328 that powers like half the stuff, even the 100 gig switches, the CRS 504s, I'm powering with PoE, even though I don't know that you're supposed to, but I am. And so more PoE capabilities of having multiple PoE in and PoE out is incredibly useful. I think that's a huge piece for me. And if you could, I don't even remember, does it support NVMe? I don't even remember. I think there's USB in there, but NVMe in the 5009 would be huge. Having that, I know that's a lot to throw into one small box, but that would be huge as well.
Well, we'll write that down. Okay, so CCR 1000 series. Are you sad to see it goes away?
Well, in one sense, yes, I am sad, because if you remember, you gave me one of my very first CCR, the very first lab equipment we ever had, you gave me in 2015.
So there's a story behind it. So when we travel to the moms, we take equipment with us. So first CCRs, and usually let's put it this way, it's fun to take it across the customs. So in US, you can show lots of papers that this is not officially not officially the product. There's no such product. This is development, so you can get it through. Not so much in other countries that we travel to. And usually when we travel to other side of the world, we love to make several months in a row. So usually it starts with US and then we go to the other country. Either it's Mexico or South America somewhere. And then it's much more complicated to bring equipment. And we were on the brink of like destroying that equipment on the customs because they didn't allow us to pass it, then to just give it away because it's like first. So leaving the equipment to you guys was actually, for us, much more easier time to get to the next destination.
Less weight to carry.
And much less problems in the customs.
So so that was when you guys were getting rid of your contraband to smuggle into the next country. That was I think the CCR 1072 was the first one that I got, and that was the start of our MikroTik lab. We started adding things from there, but yeah, it's funny because I've been around for the entire life cycle of the CCR 1000 series. I was around when they were the newest thing in town, and everybody wanted a CCR 1036 or a 1072 or a 1009. And you could do some amazing things with them. We built, I think, for one vendor. In fact, I think one of the very first large companies that MikroTik referred to us, because MikroTik, we do a lot of work for really big publicly traded companies, because we have a lot of engineers that have background in those areas. And I think MikroTik had referred one of those big publicly traded companies to us, and they needed a VPN solution that would handle hundreds of thousands of VPN endpoints. And it wasn't really possible on a single router, but we finally figured out that if we load balanced it across multiple CCRs, that we could terminate hundreds of thousands of VPN endpoints. And it wasn't very much traffic. It was, just a little bit. But for management.
Was that at the same time we actually deep dive into optimization and increase that number like tenfold for you guys?
We sent, in fact, if I go dig out my tickets to MikroTik support at the time, we sent several tickets in because we were hitting thresholds, and I think we got some guidance on it. Was OpenVPN.
I was on receiving end on that tickets at that point in time, so I was replying to you guys.
And we were, and I think that's where we first started talking a lot, because we were trying to get it as high as it could go, and I think we finally settled on 10,000 sessions for a CCR 1036 8G2S plus. That was the limit. But we ended up building a solution that I think they had quoted it out from another vendor's firewalls, and it was going to cost I don't know, $1 million US to get enough firewalls to do 100,000 VPN connections. And I think we did it for, in fact, the MikroTiks were the least expensive part. We had to get load balancers from another company to do genuine load balancers to load balance to the MikroTiks. And we put it together for, I don't know, 40 or 50,000 US. And that was what got us started in doing that kind of work. But that was a pretty big win for us in the CCR 1000 series. And it was one of the first things that we were able to show that the CCR 1000 series, could be used for a publicly traded company, could be used in a big, stable environment, in a multi-billion-dollar company. And so, yes, one part of me is going to be very sad to see the CCR 1000 series start to go away now that Tolera chips are no longer being made. But at the same time, I think, it had a really good run. I know they'll be around for a long time. They'll still be, around, as MikroTik likes to support things as best they can for a very long time. But the opportunities that are available in the CCR 2K series are very exciting to me. So I won't get rid of my CCR 1000s. They're all still here in the lab. As long as they're still power up, I'll still have them. But no, I'm very excited for the CCR 2K series. So it's sad, but it's not that sad.
Fair enough. So let's talk about a little bit about potential futures. So hardware-wise, what would you like to see come from MikroTik in the future? What's missing?
I think the biggest thing that I would like to see, and obviously I'm looking at this from the perspective of someone that does a lot of routing and switching. I spent a lot of time on peering into the global table with BGP in IPv4 and IPv6. And so whether it's an enterprise or a data center or an ISP, there are a lot of people that use MikroTik routers for BGP peering and transit. And the CCR 2K series was the 2216 and 2116 were great. They really paved the way for a whole bunch of things that we could do. But the one thing I would like to see in later CCR 2K series, because I know Marvel has the hardware chip to support it, is being able to support full tables in hardware. So being able to support maybe a couple million routes in hardware, and then only using the CPU for the control plane, that's definitely big on my wish list. Being able to do multiple 100 gig ports, if I, getting a device that could do 8 by 100 gig, 16 by 100 gig, 32 by 100 gig, would be fantastic to be able to use as a core switch or core router. Again, with having the Marvel ASIC. That's one of my favorite things, that the choices that MikroTik has made in recent years is the pairing with Marvel Prestera line and the ASICs that have gone into them, because it's opened up a world of options. So
I have one question. In 100 gig world, 8 ports, 16 ports, 32 ports, how does router differs from switch?
how does a router differ from a switch
as far as from 100 gig ports and so on. So this, as fast as those speeds become, that concept of router and switch is coming more blurrier. So
it is. So I'll give you my traditional definition of router versus switch, because my traditional definition has always been that the packet rewrite is slightly different. The way that you rewrite the header is slightly different. So when it's in a CPU and you're rewriting the header as part of a CPU flow, obviously there are performance challenges when you send it into the CPU chain and the flow chain. Even if you're using fastpath and things like that, it's still a slightly different type of header rewrite than if you're going into an ASIC and you're going to put it into an ASIC. Then there's a slightly different way the header is rewritten in the ASIC. And I'm not a hardware engineer. I've talked to a lot of other smart people that have explained this to me, and that's my basic understanding of the difference. Is there's a slightly different way that the hardware deals with the packet rewrite to forward the packet.
Now let's imagine a situation, because if you have 100 gig ports, you will have some kind of switch chip. Yes. That's set in stone. You cannot have it differently. Yes. But there are switch chips with 10K entry offloading. There's switch with 100K offloading, and there's switch with 1 million K offloading. So what happens is that when you hit any of those limits, you have to go to the CPU, because other option is just to drop them, which would be not good if we would start randomly drop connections.
So I've been there. I've done that. It's not good. It's not fun.
So the question is, where is the switch ending, and at what hardware offloading number does you consider it as a switch, or at what number it's a router? So it's different for every person?
Yeah, I would say so. Typically, where I see the difference between a switch, here's where I see the difference between a switch and a router. Part of it is the route count. So part of it is the ability to put multiple routes in hardware. So certainly if you're going to do 1 million or 2 million routes, then you're really into more of a router in the way that somebody would sell that and make that a product. Even though it is layer 3 switching. It absolutely is layer 3 switching, and it's all in hardware, but most people would classify that as a router, even though it is switching. But where you really get the difference between a switch and a router and still using the hardware is when you get into things like buffering and encapsulation and decapsulation of services like VPLS, and VXLAN. And then those things is the termination of services, and the encap decap as like a PE role is really where you see that as more of a router, because in a switch, usually all you're concerned about are VLANs and layer 3 forwarding. And that's where I see that end is you may have routing protocols. You may have BGP, you may have OSPF, you may have VLANs, and you may be doing all the things that you would do in switching, but it's those services, the termination and encapsulation and decapsulation of services like, and even, PPPoE, which I think is, mostly going to be in CPU. That's where I see it to be more of a router. If the box is set up to be able to do buffering, shaping, subscriber services, subscriber management, encap decap of user services like VPLS and VXLAN, that to me is more of a router than a switch, if that helps.
Oh, not really, because why am I so interested in your opinion about this? Because As you probably know, I think I told you already, I'm one of the main guys who are responsible for that strange naming of our products that we have, which has divided lots of people, and somebody really like our descriptive naming that explains everything about, okay, not everything, main things about the product.
I finally figured it
And
out, by the
so,
way you guys name products. It took me 10 years, but I did figure it out.
thank you. I thought I made it obvious, but okay.
No, I found the page finally. I found that page a long time ago that explains it.
So I currently have a few products coming in the pipelines that I don't know how to call them.
Okay.
CCR or CRS. Because what is the factor that really distinguishes it? So first you said that it's might be amount of hardware offloading entries that have to go to the CPU or not. Maybe it's a CPU power that you have at your disposal.
That's fair. I would put that in there. If you have a much higher end CPU, that's more of a router. If you have a lower end CPU, that's more of a switch. I would agree with that.
Okay, so if we take CCR 2016, let's say with the higher speed, higher tier ports, is it CCR or is it CRS? From your opinion.
For which one? For which platform?
Well, let's say CCR 2216, the same CPU.
That one is a router is definitely a router to me.
Even if it comes with a much powerful switch and much faster ports.
Yes, and because if you look at what most of the networking industry is doing, there are very few routers that are pure CPU or even rely on the CPU anymore. I think even though it's called a router, most other vendors that we will put in and that we work with, it's all hardware accelerated. So I think, when I first started in the 90s, it was if it uses a CPU, it's a router. If it uses a chip, it's a switch. That's the way it was in the 90s. But now I think most everyone considers a router to every router to have some kind of hardware offload for the most part. So I think that's very much assumed in 2023. So if you look at the way MikroTik builds routers and switches and products, then I think the higher end CPU is going to go towards a router, and a lower end CPU like the CRS 500 series you just released that has, I think it's a MIPS, right? It's got a MIPS processor, if I remember.
There is a few MIPS just because we wanted to target special power envelope for those, so you can deploy them also in different places. Because as soon as you stick some kind of CCR type of CPU there, the power consumption just raises, and you are limited to the rack mount basically.
I think it's, I would call it a layer 3 switch versus a router, because being able to use very, basic layer 3 switching capabilities, even with the MIPS CPU, is very helpful if you only need to do a few routes.
Yeah, but that's where our naming of CRS, which is Cloud Router Switch, comes really handy. So what device actually to name CCR from now on? Like Cloud Core Router. That's a thought to think about.
I think so. I'll think. Do you want some help renaming the acronyms and keep the CCR and CRS? Or?
No, I'm just thinking loud, and I think it's a fun topic to talk with you because you guys are utilizing both things a lot. So maybe you had some. You gave me some input to think about. So thank you for that. Okay, and if we fly away from the rack mount world of hardware and land somewhere at home, small office, home, maybe some Wi-Fi equipment. So what's missing? What are you looking for? What could be introduced?
So I think you guys already have this, but I don't know that it's in the AX series. Being able to have an in-wall AP is great, and I think there already is an in-wall AP or one that could be in-wall, but it's
wall socket. You mean?
Yeah, if you're gonna put it in a inside of a wall, like if you're gonna cut a space out and put it into a wall, whether it's a power socket or just mounting it on the wall, those are helpful in the AX series. I think taking the RB 5000 series and whatever that's going to turn into and building an all-in-one wireless router and gateway would be great. I'd love to see the audience in an AX form factor. I like the look of the audience. I think it's great. I'd love to see it come in different colors, maybe black, the black that you're doing, see an audience in maybe black with AX capabilities. I think the meshing capabilities of that's great. Maybe even maybe some different bands. I think I don't know if you guys have gotten into 6 gigahertz and things like that. I'd love to see
Wi-Fi 6E.
Yeah. I think Wi-Fi 6E would be great. I know you guys have all the different countries compliance to go through to go do all that. Those would be great. I'm trying to think of the other things that I would love to see in Wi-Fi. I think most of the Wi-Fi, you already have most of the form factors of Wi-Fi that are out there. I would love to see, I don't even know if it's possible, but a map light. If it was possible to do a map light in AX or something, or maybe even a map in AX, that's one of my most favorite routers. I use them all the time. I keep them in my backpack. I found one in my car when I was going through the car wash. I was vacuuming out my seat and I found a map light under the seat in my truck. Because that's how many of them I have hanging around. So yeah, I don't know how possible it is to put AX into the map light or the map, but those would be very cool.
Well, one thing for sure, there will be hotter versions of map lights and so on, if it's even possible. So I'm not hardware designer myself. I have early exposure to designs, and I also give some feedback of ideas that are implemented or maybe something that customers reported and should be changed, like from revision to revision or in the new product that we are. So basically, if we are designing new, let's assume PoE switch, what are the usual complaints about previous PoE switch? So, and my department usually collects all the hardware complaints like that.
So I'm going to give you, so since you mentioned PoE, I'm going to give you one hardware wish list that is probably it's going to be for home, but I think it's going to be for the WISPs as well, is having a switch that can support the highest wattage per port.
BT?
Is BT, yeah, the BT. Having a switch that's BT from MikroTik, and especially one that can handle different voltages within the switch, because I know for memory serves, MikroTik usually passes through whatever the input voltage is. But having a switch that can handle either voltage, 24 or 48, for home and for wireless ISPs, having more PoE power and more ports that can do that is probably one of the single biggest asks I think that we see in, and not just home, but if you think about small business, small business and SME, small medium enterprise, that they tend to use the same things that home users do. And I think having a powerful series of PoE switches that go into the BT standard and have the ability to mix voltages would be fantastic. I think I would probably, if coming on your podcast and not mentioning that PoE, all the WISPs would probably come after me and beat me with sticks if I don't mention that.
Okay, I can dig you in a bigger hole. So, how many ports and how many of them high power? How many low power? What would be optimal?
I'm gonna say that I think that I would say you're probably going to want to see maybe three different types of port setups. I think you're probably going to want to have one that's 4 or 5 or 6 ports, one that's maybe 12, and one that's maybe that's 24, because not everybody is, that's BT is going to be obviously more money for you to produce. There's more power that's required. The components are more expensive. So I think you're going to see people, if you have a product series that covers those different port varieties. I mean, obviously it'd be nice to have a 48 port BT switch. I think that'd be great too, but I don't know how hard it is to maintain the different port variations. So I think having, you can always stack, put 224 port switches together, and connect those together. So don't be wrong, I'd love to see the higher port density, but I think having more pricing options is great, of being able to do smaller to 24 ports, something like that. So that would be my take, is I would have 3 different port setups of 4 to 5 to 6, 12 and 24, and then 48 if it's possible to make it
all like high power or some combination.
I would say yes. In general, most I think it's fine to mix a few low power ports in there, but for the most part, people are always wanting to get more power out of PoE. We've done lights. We had a huge PoE lighting project that somebody wanted because they wanted the control over the lights and the reduced simplification of wiring. So that was very, very, very attractive to them. So I think as you build these things, as often happens with MikroTik, you're thinking about home users or ISP users or data center users, but we find them in some of the places that you would never think of, like power companies and at a concert hall, and places that you wouldn't normally think to find it. But so I think having a mix is important. But I think usually, if you're going to go through the time and trouble to buy a BT switch, I think most people are going to want the majority of ports to have all the power they can get on every port.
So I can reveal that we already have a dedicated letter in the naming scheme for BT ports.
Oh, cool. Okay.
So it's B.
It's B. Okay.
Yeah. So if you will see a CRS with instead of like 24P, 24B, that you will know that it's a BT PoE switch, for example. Not saying that that's exact model that we are working on, but just an example. So there's lots of new hardware, new ideas that we work on MikroTik. BT is definitely one of them. We have several projects. Which one will make sense to produce? Or last few years we have to say that we can actually produce, which is very problematic. Like COVID was less problematic than like part shortage that followed the COVID epidemic. Because one of the reasons why we still don't have any mums, because it's much more better for us to actually work here and try to produce enough equipment so we can get all the demand done than to just drive around the mums and basically delaying everything even further.
Yeah.
So that's the reality currently on. But we have several BT switches and home user equipment in development, but I honestly don't know which ones will actually make financial sense and which ones we in the end we will be actually be able to produce, because parts that you can get or can't get changes every time. We have we already have a dedicated team here that works only with critical parts. That means that following which ones we are seeing that are running out, and what can we use instead. And sometimes we need to redesign the whole product. Like one of the examples which were most painful was actually CCR 2116. If you noticed, if you received one of the first few thousand modules, you saw that in the front panel there's a cutout for USB, which is sticked over. It was just because we were not able to get USB chips, because they were cancelled, like end of life.
I think I've heard that story, because I didn't know why the sticker was over it at first, and then I have somewhere I heard that story that it was a part shortage.
So we had basically a decision to make, either to produce because one of the things that's taking the longest to order is a PCB, especially a big one. So you have to do it in weeks, like months before you actually get the product running. So PCB is set. Second thing is all the tooling and everything for the cases. And when it's already started and everything, then you can possibly buy parts, because it's only shipping question. And then you find out that those parts that you need crucially for that feature are not available.
Oh, I can only imagine. It's been an interesting past few years for hardware and supply, hasn't it?
Yes, because we have quadrupled the amount of testing with the reduced number of products, because we are testing all the alternatives and all the different suppliers and everything, just to make sure. And logistics is much more harder in this case. So that's the reason why you sometimes see some strange things like hole for USB but no USB in it, and so on. And then we will try the next production to add that USB, and then find out that maybe that's not possible again, and so on. So there's few things that really hit us really hard in these past few years. But the good thing is that we already seeing that the parts that somebody told us that we will have like 50-week lead time, suddenly you can get them in next week. So I take that a shortage, part shortage is going to the end, and we will try to produce enough equipment to get to you guys, because most complaints that we get to support right now is that you guys cannot buy our equipment in amounts that they want. So
yeah, that's not a unique problem to MikroTik. I think that's everybody. In fact, I'll say we work with a lot of different vendors. I think you guys have probably done the best of anybody that I've worked with over the entire the pandemic, and all of the other things that are going on in the world. I would say, I mean, certainly I know MikroTik's had parts shortages and things that you couldn't get and things that were out of stock. But if I look at, usually with MikroTik, when it's been replenishing, it's usually been a matter of weeks or months. We have some vendors that it's years. We had one that was projected 2.5 years that they were waiting to get a router. So it's really, really bad in a lot of other vendors, because their supply chains were not built to handle this kind of extended supply shortage, because they had very complicated manufacturing processes where the orders were fulfilled when the customer would order it and not stocking it on the shelves. Yeah. But I would say overall, MikroTik has been probably, I mean, I'll go ahead and say it, I think they've been the best network vendor that we've worked with for the time it takes to get a product during the shortage. I think it's been the quickest of any vendor that we've worked with consistently for the last 2 or 3 years.
Thank you. It's nice to hear, because there's lots of people working overtimes to get the products running and get all the system running and get the products out as fast as possible.
Yeah, and I always, so that the people that always tell me like, oh, MikroTik doesn't have this, they're not going to have this for 2 months. I said, you need to go talk to another vendor, and they're going to give you a quote of 2 years. So 2 months is nothing. It's a lot worse in most everything else in networking. So I think given the situation that you had to deal with, I think you guys did a good job.
But we are also in that undefined space between, whereas we're somewhere between industry and home user, and home users want to get everything now.
Yes.
And that's where all the pains are happening. So if they decided to have a MikroTik and you say that it will take 2 months, they will just get something else that they can get your hands on. Okay, so you have a unique opportunity now.
Oh, great.
To ask difficult questions that you wanted to ask or find out something about MikroTik. So I can say you that this video will be edited. So even if I tell you some secret information, we'll just cut it out afterwards. So
I will start with the one that I've been talking about for years and years and years, which is when will we see EVPN in BGP? And EVPN and SR MPLS segment routing, and ISIS routing protocol. Those are the 3 things that I think if you ever go read my posts in the forum, those are the 3 things I've been asking for 3 or 4 years. And I think it's important to mention why I'm asking that is that almost every ISP in the world, all of the large ISPs have already made the change to these protocols. They don't use LDP really as much anymore for MPLS. They've moved to segment routing, and most of the larger ISPs have moved to ISIS instead of OSPF. And so as we've seen this big change in trying to make the protocols that the enterprises use and the service providers use closer, enterprises are using EVPN and BGP with VXLAN mostly. Service providers are using EVPN with BGP, and they use SR-MPLS as the data plane instead of VXLAN. And so the whole world is kind of going that way. And so I'd love to be able to have those features in a MikroTik. And I'll go even one step further for you of just to round out the routing protocols of EIGRP, only because it allows us to integrate, if you're in a network that's Cisco only, since EIGRP is mostly a Cisco protocol, there are a lot of networks that are built since they've been around for so long that people want to be able to put a MikroTik router in, but they don't want to have to redistribute into OSPF or do static routes. They want to use native EIGRP. So there's a ton of networks that we could get into, and a ton of problems that we could solve with those routing protocols. And so that's my biggest wish list. I have others, but that's my biggest question is,
okay, your wish list just misses one thing.
What is it missing?
Priority list. What is the first that you need?
What is the first one? So I'm going to go ahead and be realistic. I think EVPN is the first one that I would like to see, only because I think it's going to be the easiest to implement, and not to say that it's easy, but you already have BGP. It's, that's adding an address family to BGP and extending your current BGP implementation. So if I were to do it in the list of priority, I would want EVPN first. Then I think it would make sense to add ISIS just as an IGP. And then, well, no, I take that back. I'm going to change my order of my list. You already have OSPF. As much as I'd like to see ISIS, I think I'd rather see segment routing with OSPF second, then ISIS, and then the others, because I think EVPN can be used with VXLAN, which you already have. MikroTik's already added VXLAN into the, into there, and it's not been as easy to interrupt VXLAN into other vendors because it's missing EVPN, and most other vendors use EVPN. So I think that's my biggest priority, is having that first, and then the others, and then EIGRP would be my last. But having all those protocols together, I think, would round out the routing stack of MikroTik, where we could do almost anything with it, with some very modern protocols and standards. So that's my first wish list. How many wish lists do you want me to give you?
No, that was like year or a little bit more worth of work. Wish lists already for our routing development team. So almost all the things that you called out is in our to-do list in different priorities. So thank you for ordering them for us. We'll see how this your opinion will affect the order in the future. I'm not saying it will, but I'm definitely showing this part of the video to our developers.
Okay.
But as far as I know, and just to notice that the last few years I'm not a software guy anymore. Yeah, I'm all hands Mr. Hardware guy. Yeah, as I told you in our Christmas video, I'm the evil elf that delays all the products. So, but as far as I know, that currently the priority one for our routing development team is to get all the features on par with version 6. There's still some things missing. You probably can call them out better than I do.
I'll go ahead and mention one that I know everybody has been dying for, which is BFD.
Yeah.
And that one, I don't know how, a lot of people think BFD is very simple to implement because the protocol itself does a very simple task. But I know from my experience in the CCR1 case series, there was a few years, I think, before BFD got stabilized on OSPF. I don't know what the challenge was specifically, but I know it wasn't the easiest thing in the world. And I also mentioned on the forums, I see other vendors, have bugs and issues with BFD. So even though it seems very, very simple, I guess maybe, I don't know if it's because of the high rate of packets and the ability to quickly transition that to the routing protocol to very quickly converge, if that's a challenge. But that's one that people have been dying to have is BFD.
So yeah, basically that's the highest priority currently. So idea is to get rid of version 6 necessity at all. So we can move on only to version 7.
Sure.
And then comes some stuff that you mentioned on the list.
Okay.
So
awesome.
I'm not saying we are working on it, but they're definitely working, keeping those features in mind. No, there's when you create the whole new routing system, you actually have to plan the structure for everything. So that's why initial phase of that process is taking much more longer. And now in the end, when you have the running engine, which considers all the stuff, you just plug the features in one by one, and it's much more easier. That's actually why the RouterOS version 7 took so long, mainly because of that new routing engine that we made. And as far as I know, it's there's only few things that we needed to add, like patch it. Everything was taken planned quite accordingly to the necessity. Okay. Anything else you want to ask?
Let me see. What would be my other questions? I think the other wow. I'm so wrapped up in routing, I haven't thought about any. We already talked about we already talked earlier in the video about full tables in hardware. So that was going to be my other one. Is there I know Marvel has a chip for that. Is that something that is coming? Is that something that, since you're Mr. Hardware guy, is that made it on your test bench yet?
I cannot answer that question directly, but we have a very good relationship with Marvel. They have really interesting toys that they can offer us, and usually when they come up with something new, they even call us and, do you want to get this and play with it? And it's rarely then we say no. I can say that. So I don't know what chip particular are you talking about, but we have some new developments in regards to the Marvel chip series, definitely, and some other series also.
Okay, that's great. Let me think of my other. The full tables in hardware I'm very excited about. So we'll see if that actually comes about. I'm thinking about my other questions that I want to ask in hardware. So I'll say this. I'll get out of I'll ask you one more routing and switching question, and then I'll move on to some other products in the wireless realm. So my other question in hardware has been: have you ever considered building a chassis with line cards? Is that something that you've thought about?
What do you mean line cards?
So like if you think of where you have a box that is that holds the network cards, the interfaces. So you have a box that has slots, and you put the cards with the ports in on a rail into the slot. Like I think the most common example are like the big switches that take up a half a rack that you slide the cards into, that you slide the ports into. I don't know if is there going to be a router that's more than one RU, or a switch that's more than one RU that would be like 2 or 3 RU that you could have modules that you would change out for ports?
We already have products, by the way, that are moduled. Maybe you have not realized, but our PoE switches are actually moduled ones. They have a PoE daughter boards on them. So if you take those boards off, it becomes a regular switch without PoE. So we have played with that idea, we have already implemented it, but the fact is that making something very moduled and very expensive and so on, it actually makes it much more expensive.
Sure.
And one of the things that MikroTik, one of the cornerstones that everyone knows MikroTik is to offer new solutions like tier down price range. So for example, our 504 switch, 4-port 100 gig switch, there's nobody even close price-wise that offers 100 gig switching to that switch.
No, it's not even close. We use them for breakout switches on border routers. Even with other vendors, we use them. When we need to break out 100 gig ports, we use the 504s for that.
Yeah, so that's basically.
So it makes it making it modular makes it more expensive, which makes it tough.
It's make it as expensive as other vendors, where they can basically just squeeze us out with the market share.
Sure, that makes sense. Okay.
So we are not aiming to that. I'm not saying that 100% no, because there is some modularity will be in future products, but going full scale like you already implemented, because I think know some Cisco devices that have that, because we first had to buy a chassis and then we had to pollute it with the plates like for $10,000 each or something like that.
They're very expensive, yes. And they use a lot of power too. They're not very power efficient either.
And the problem is they are very loud. Because in MikroTik here we are working in a open office environment.
Yes, in fact that's why I use MikroTik at home, because it's not loud. I will be it won't make anybody upset because it's not too loud.
But now imagine 20 or 40 2216s going on full load on some far corner.
That would be louder. For sure.
Or the routing testing with all the Cisco equipment rack. when it
I
goes
know
out.
how loud that is because we just did a routing test for another vendor and we used MikroTik. We actually use CHRs in that case, but I have pushed the 2216s and the 2116s and all of the others in tests with throughput and routing, and it gets very loud in the lab now because we have a lot of them. So, but it's okay. So I have wireless questions now. So here are my wireless questions. Is there's obviously MikroTik's done a lot in 60 gigahertz, and there's a lot of things that have come out in 60 gigahertz. Now, in the US, and I think we're even seeing this happening in other countries, is we're having variations of LTE. In the US, it's called CBRS, and having equipment for those kind of solutions, where you have variants of LTE. Now, I know MikroTik already has a few LTE products. Are there going to be more where we have an eNode B or a base station and a UE or a client radio in the family of LTE and 5G? Will more solutions like that coming?
There's definitely more solutions in LTE and high speed ultra band, or how you call it, 60 gigahertz.
Yeah.
We are definitely working on them. I'm not familiar with that LTE solution that you talked with, but there are several vendors, modem producers, that we are actually working on very exciting products. If they will offer us some kind of solution that covers that in normal price range, I say that would be quite easy actually to implement because we have all the parts already ready. So having a new modem by product and getting the product done, I think we already learned a lot of different interesting things from our previous products, because the first one was the hardest one, and our LTE product line actually came very good time, because basically we expanded enormously during the COVID, just because work from home just became suddenly the thing. The whole world started to work from home and everyone needed a LTE modem.
So absolutely. We've built a lot of ISPs in the last few years because of that.
LTE products went far and wide, and we actually had to make a separate team in testing, separated from wireless, because usually we had just the wireless guys, and they did everything from 5G, 2G, LTE, 60 gigahertz, LoRa, and everything. And we now had to separate LTE guys into separate department because the actual amount of work that they have now is more than other Wi-Fi's combined.
Oh, I can imagine. So, okay. So let me ask this question then. Now that you're starting to separate out into different departments, I have a couple questions. So point-to-point radios. I can't remember the highest speed that MikroTik has right now, but I think it's 2 gig for point-to-point, something like that, if I remember right.
Yeah.
Are there any plans for 10 gig point-to-point?
Yes.
Okay, great. That one was easy. So I think that would be great to see. 10 gig point-to-point radios would be fantastic to see. That would help out.
I can maybe even tell you the secret. Yeah, because it's already passed. But if you take a look at your 5009, if you open it up and take a look there, there's a place for 60 gigahertz chip there.
Okay. Cool.
Which unfortunately didn't come to the reality. It basically didn't work as we expected, so we had to move that to the different product.
Okay.
So, but we played with it, and it was nice, but it was not customer ready.
Okay.
The
so 10 gig point-to-point is that's a thing. That's happening.
I'm not sure about getting full 10 gigs, but it will be definitely more than 2 and you will have SFPs on both
SFP plus ports.
Yeah, but it's in development, and in development that means anything from half a year to 2 years.
Okay.
So, but yeah, we already have some ideas how to implement that. We were wrong. We learned from our mistakes. We moved to other iterations. But 5009 came out as a nice product anyway, even without that feature, because it was like universal all-in-one, but some features of that didn't work.
and it looks cool, which is the most important thing.
Yeah.
So my other questions are in the in the RF space. I think I've already seen that there's AX wireless for home users, home and office and small business. But I think I saw where using AX out for wireless ISPs in wireless broadband is also in the works. Is what I read.
Yeah, if you actually watch the first episode, both trainers, Ron was really interested in outdoor product lineup and so on. So, if you noticed, AX uses completely different new wireless package, and there is basically adoption period that we need to get all the features running, because home users don't utilize all the features that outdoor stuff uses. So it's better to get like everything on proper order for the home user when there's no complaint and everything is working as expected and so on. It's working really well, but there are few features and few things, like for example, we opened it up only the full spectrum of 5 gigahertz only recently for certification point of view on AX products and so on. So it's getting there, and as soon as we will get that smoothed out, I think the new hardware for outside deployment will slowly come in one by one. So that's currently the plan. About form factors, probably we'll stick to ones that are popular right now, if we can manage the heat dissipation, because AX, like hardest stuff currently is to get everything in the same form factor and keep it cool enough.
That's why my this one's a lot heavier and has more heat sink on it, right? My AX2.
Yeah, if you have a AC2, by the way, you can like easily compare the amount of heat that's dissipating from one and from other. And like people are not realizing that adding a simple USB port, basically it turns out it's 5 watts more power, from which better portion is getting as a heat out.
Wow.
So one of the reasons why that device that you have over there doesn't have USB port, but the AX3 cubed have one, because it's bigger chassis, bigger heatsink, and it can dissipate that.
Okay, that makes sense.
And that's with many features, basically, why that I can answer why this device have only this set. This device also has a downclocked CPU to minimum megahertz, just because to keep it cool in this form factor.
So now we need videos with water cooled HAP AX2 and overclocked HAP AX2 with the LED lights.
I think we have few customers that have seen something like that. Marketing will probably post it if it's good enough.
That looks like a really good job for Victor's. If you gave Victor's the liquid cooled HAP AX2 and you had the LED lights and the liquid cooled, that seems right up his alley.
Yes, Victor's really found his niche in here. There's some videos that only Victor's can do.
So do I have time for one more hardware question?
You are saying when it's over, when you have to go. So
okay, no, I'm good. So the other question I have on hardware is would be in the think about fiber to the home. So years ago, I think there was a GPON SFP that came out that allowed MikroTik to be an ONT, or I guess ONU, depending on the terminology.
Do you mean the module, the SFP module?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so you guys already have that. What I haven't seen, and I don't know if you've looked at developing it, is the unit that goes on the other side, the OLT, having the rack mount unit that you can use the put a PON port into, or most in this case where a lot of people are getting into XGS PON with 10 gig. Have you guys looked at that? Is that possible for MikroTik to produce? Are you interested in producing or developing that?
It's really hard market to get into, just because of getting hardware. getting everything necessary, because basically most vendors just use their own chips and don't sell them anywhere.
Yep.
So I'm not saying it's not possible, but it's point of entry is much more harder than the regular networking. So GPON idea is not lost to us, because basically the sheer amount of features. Initially, it was actually quite interesting, because here in Eastern Europe we are not really into GPONs, but slowly also all the networkings now, all the biggest ISPs offer fiber to home 1 gig up and down, GPON wise. And also, you know that we are now, when the COVID basically started, and there was limitations for Chinese equipment that you can use, sorry, implemented. So, you know, some companies were banned from usage in US and Europe. Government companies, big ISPs, basically came to us and asked us what equipment can we produce to replenish that. So, you know, Chateau is our LTE solution to that, and our local mobile providers actually giving them out to the new customers for home usage. And also, one of the biggest requests is GPON client end solution. So I think that gives you enough information that we are thinking about it at very least.
It would be cool. I know you always have to evaluate the cost and the cost and the ability to manufacture it, but I think that would be I know I always ask the ISP questions because I do so much work on ISPs, but even we see it in I'll tell you where else it's used is in office buildings. So if you have really, really tall office buildings, skyscrapers, you know, New York or London or you know, Dubai or somewhere like that, where they use it a lot is it's GPON makes it a lot easier to get fiber to all the different floors, and so they use them in skyscrapers a lot. In fact, I've seen that quite a bit, and using it in very tall buildings because they can use the single mode and just reduce the amount of cabling. So it'd be interesting to see that. I'm trying to think of my other, if I have any other, all my wishes, or you know, all my secret things I want to ask MikroTik. I think you already mentioned the mums. You know, a lot of people have asked about the mum. You know, when is the mum coming back? And I think you said, you know, you guys have got to focus on getting the supply chain more under control, and probably other world events as well.
Yeah, the problem is that those people that you won't see in the mums are usually long hair, high experience MikroTik guys that during the COVID took separate departments on their own. So sales, me in the hardware testing, Sergey support. And if you want us all shipped to the mum, the company basically stops.
So yeah, because you've been through a lot of growth in the time that I've known MikroTik, the new headquarters, and there are a lot of new faces. And I used to know most all the names at MikroTik, but you guys have grown so much that you know there's lots of new names.
There's lots of new names, and I can say you that even I don't know everyone at the MikroTik now. So that's how we have grown compared to the 10, 15 years ago, or even when I started 18 years ago, which is like different lifetime already. But
in thinking about that, are you ever thinking about opening offices outside of Latvia?
Current answer is no, because it adds a complexity, both in like trade secrets and stuff and so on. And we are still open office company, so the ideas are going wildly around and everyone has an input. And this is what actually, how it results to have our products as we have them. The end result, it's not just a single person working in a separate environment. Okay, working from home part a little bit changed that, but as soon as it was possible to get back in the office, we try to get back in the office. Some departments have like mandatory few days in the office for those who got too used to work from home. But for example, my testing department, well, you cannot take all the secret equipment back to the home and so on. So testing department is always in the office working with all the fun parts and so on. So especially when somebody brings you a new chip on development board and you have to work like hand in hand with developer just to like run RouterOS for the first time on it, which is quite exciting. And then reporting first bugs and so on, that this PCI Express line works at 2x instead of 4x and such things and so on. So
yeah,
it's quite exciting time. There's lots of developments, and also with all the growth that we have, there's lots of management. And unfortunately, there's only few people that can follow all the management stuff.
I can appreciate that. In running a global company, I can definitely. Mine's not as big as MikroTik, but it's still, when you're spread out in a lot of time zones, I can definitely I can appreciate that, the management aspect of that.
So it's fun. There's many new products coming out. For one simple reason, there are many products actually finished up, and we are just getting ready to get the chance to produce them as soon as we get all the necessary parts. So you have seen that we already leaked, like in some videos, information about products that hasn't come out yet. Yeah. For different reasons, there is delays. So new products are coming out. We are working on several really exciting products that will be game changers at the particular market. Again, one thing for sure, they will be like game changers in price. Maybe not feature set, but definitely in price. So I think we will entertain you for quite a while. Also, RouterOS version 7 will become more interesting. By the way, that reminds me, what do you think about our newest package?
You're talking about the enterprise storage, the ROS?
Yes.
So I had a lot of people asking me about what that's going to be used for, and we had a big discussion about that internally, because I've started to use my 2116 more and more to host containers, and I put the NVMe drive in it, but the ability to do things like NVMe over TCP and having different RAID levels was very, very interesting. I think that, to me, was I think it was great, because the more we can use services on the router, a lot of the systems people would probably disagree with me, because a lot of the systems people are like, well, why wouldn't you just go get a server? But there's a lot of places that we can put a MikroTik that it's not that's not practical to go put a server. We can go put a MikroTik router, whether it's a 5009 or it's a 2116. So having the advanced storage options I think it was really, 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 really cool, because I'm continuing to use the routers more as systems and building systems on top of them. So I think that's great. I've always found MikroTik has such a unique combination of features that people dream up things that you wouldn't imagine. I think I told you the very first mom we went to, somebody had they were doing whale watching. That was the very first MikroTik project we ever did in Alaska. They had cameras and MikroTik wireless equipment so they could watch the whales in Alaska. It was a university. They were doing it was research, and that was the very first exposure I had. And we had sent somebody to Alaska to go fix the one of the routers had lost its config, and it just needed the config reapplied. But we had to go put somebody on a helicopter to go fix the MikroTik. And so the interesting thing to me is MikroTik gets used in some very in some very unique places. I think you guys have put SpaceX has them on near their launch pads, and I think the racing organizations have them in race cars. We've seen them in mines. We had a mine where somebody built, instead of doing point-to-point wireless shots between towers, they did it down the shaft. Every turn of the shaft was a different point-to-point link. And so when you get in those kind of environments, especially industrial and utilities and industrial type environments, that's where those kind of features of having those enterprise type features of being able to do containers and storage options gets really handy, because if you're at the bottom of a gold mine several hundred meters below the earth, it may not be the easiest place to go put a server and go rack a server, but I can put a MikroTik there and I can have an application run there. So that's why I think it's useful, and it's really helpful. I haven't even tested all the different features that you guys have had because my 2116 has been busy testing for customers in the lab, so I need to free it to test RouterOS because I haven't had a chance to test it.
Sometimes developers surprise us also with the features that they come up with. But yeah, one of the things that's for sure that MikroTik has grown not only like logistic-wise, support-wise, and so on. We also have much more developers than we have before. And some people don't realize, like one of the meanest comments in that RouterOS setup was, don't waste time on storage, finish up the routing. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. Those are projects, those are separate projects, and you cannot just add and remove people from this project. Like it takes months or even a year to like get into the project and understand how it works and then to write something. So those are, guys, those are completely separate independent projects. People that working on one are not interfering with another if it's not necessary, basically.
And it wasn't always that. I think a lot of people don't. I think people that don't work as closely as we do with MikroTik and go, we don't go to the mums anymore, but we've worked really closely with MikroTik and know, pretty much all of your, all of the key people at MikroTik and have for a long time. I don't know that they realize, you guys were a much closer team 10 years ago on development. Everybody kind of worked on, a lot of different things. And now that you're bigger and you have the office, a lot of software development changes have taken place in MikroTik. You guys you have different teams for different things, and it's not just, everybody kind of helps with everything else. I mean, I know everybody had their specialty even in the old days, but there was a lot more, of you working on different things and crossing over. Whereas now you have routing team and switching team and, all the different teams for development that.
That's a logical thing to do when you're becoming larger and larger. So that's we tie into the structure and management.
Yes, exactly.
Which is pain in one place, but you cannot do anything with them if you want to grow outside your small size and so on. Okay, so we are getting to the back end of the conversation. Let's talk about future. So what's in line in the future for IP architects? What's your future plans?
So we have a lot of future plans. I think we're going to keep doing what we've doing, which is growing to be an independent consulting company. Because we work on, although we work on MikroTik a lot, we work on a lot of we work on white box, we work on commodity white box switches and things like that, and then open networking, working with open source network software like free range routing and things like that. So people come to us when they want to build a network that integrates those things. We have somebody. It's very common for us to take a network that's like an ISP, for example, and say, hey, I want these white box switches here, and I want to use MikroTik for these things, and then I want to use open source software for these things. So building validated designs for that and being able to show that that can be done on a big scale is something that we're constantly working on. So that's our growth plans. I think we're going to continue to grow. We already have people in Europe and South America. We are probably going to keep growing around the world and adding engineers to the point where, we already do 24/7 work, but, have a lot more capacity, to be, to do support for MikroTik. People, when they want phone support, they usually call IP architects to do, some kind of phone support and helping with MikroTik. So we're going to definitely continue to do more of that. But we've also gotten into some software. So I think that'll be, there'll be some open source projects that we're working on that we'll probably release, and then there's also I think some other software stuff that we've been working on that we'll eventually release. That's all in the networking space, and I think maybe in the next year or two you might see that come out of IP architects is getting into the software side of networking as well. So that's what we've been working on, and I think validating that we can take commodity components like MikroTik and put them into the biggest networks, some of the biggest networks in the planet, is really important to us, because being able to make networking accessible not just to countries that that are financially very stable, like the US and the European Union, when you look at the North America and Europe as continents, but there's other places where it's harder to get internet to, and the local economy or the currency doesn't make it as easy as it is in some places. So being able to work in developing countries and to be able to bring big solutions like 100 gig into places in Africa and Latin America that are still developing. There's some places over in Asia Pacific that are developing areas of the world that they love using MikroTik, because it's harder for all economies to support that. And so one of the things I love about MikroTik, and I always tell people that sets MikroTik apart, is that MikroTik's slogan is routing the world, and that's not just something that you guys say. There's a lot of places in the world that the internet wouldn't exist if MikroTik didn't exist, because they wouldn't be able to put anything else in. So being able to build a design out of those components and build something that works as well as a major vendor that can handle hundreds and hundreds of gigs is something that we're always working towards validating that design, so that a large company or a large ISP can use MikroTik and commodity elements in those roles, like the ISP I told you about in Africa that we're getting set up to handle. It already handles a significant portion of the traffic for the entire country, and they're working to be the entire national telecom provider, using primarily MikroTik equipment to do it.
So if you have to guess from your experience, which is most MikroTik network country in the world?
Which is the most MikroTik network country in the world? I would say, let me think. There are several in, I would say probably either the Philippines or South America. In the Philippines or in South America, we've run into some networks that are all entirely MikroTik. They have nothing but MikroTik in them. But I will say one of the largest I think that I've encountered that's all MikroTik is actually here in the US. There's one network that I work on that is a WISP that has, I think, over 3,000 towers now. And we recently worked on an issue in the routing, I think it was last year, and there were over 8,000 routers in OSPF that were MikroTik, that were hardware.
And then you will say it was in the same area.
This was all in the same in the US,
I mean,
it's states.
OSPF area.
Well, no, it started that way in that area.
Really?
Yeah. It started that way, and that didn't work very well. So we ended up designing it into multiple OSPF areas with IBGP, and then the different IBGP ASNs peer to each other with private ASNs, and then they go out to the ISP's big ASN. But no, we couldn't scale. Which also this is my dig for ISIS to your developers. If we can get ISIS in there, we can scale MikroTik IGP domains much larger. So that's my note to the developers. But yeah, I think in the developing countries, it's very common to see all MikroTik, and in the US, in the WISPs, it's very common to see all MikroTik. But if I had to put it on one country or area, I would say the Philippines. I'm sorry, not the Philippines, Indonesia. The Philippines use it too, but I said Philippines, I meant Indonesia. Indonesia is probably that is probably the place in the world that has the most MikroTik everywhere that I've seen. There's so much MikroTik in Indonesia. It's not even funny. They use it everywhere. So I think most of the country is connected with MikroTik.
Yes, and if you want to do something in university, you have to learn MikroTik to pass the exam in networking in university. You have countrywide Olympics in networking using MikroTik, and you can when we were doing MUMS, it was the first places got the tickets to the MUMS for free. We even have if we drive to US, we are like one of the networking guys with you guys, so on the same level. In Indonesia, when we arrive, it's more like we are celebrities, because there's a wall where you can take photos with us and so on, and yeah, and you actually...
Do they have a parade?
No, not yet parade, but I think eventually, if the things continue that way. But it's completely different. Like, yeah, I would say it was a culture shock for us when we arrived the first time. Yeah, and we were even translated on national TV at some point. So that's how huge we are in Indonesia. And hello to Valens and his team. Yeah, it's very interesting, especially in developing world part of the world. We feel much more like I would not say welcome, but much more. People are much more eager to see us in that part. Okay, so anything else that you want to ask or something? I think we already 1.5 hours.
Yeah, we've had a long one. No, I think I've asked all my questions that I can think of. I'm sure I left something out. I'll tell you what, I'll do a video. I'll record a video to you guys if I forget anything out and put it on YouTube. How's that? If I forgot anything.
Okay. Then basically, thank you guys for listening. Hope it was not boring for second episode. This was much more technical. We will try to script everything that Kevin said so that you can track all the abbreviations and everything that he mentioned in his text. Because for the uninitialized, it's hard to track. Even in the same sentence, there was like 4 or 5 abbreviations that not everyone know exactly. But yeah, this is the other way we plan to do these podcasts. Have some highly technical guys, get the feedback from them, utilize their feedback for our purposes also. But I hope that's interesting for you all other guys listening it. To get your ideas, and you have a way to add your input to it. So please leave the comment. Did you like this episode better than the previous one? Leave the comment about the wish list that Kevin had. Which features do you think need to be implemented first? Which hardware need to be added? And so on. And thank you very much, Kevin, for coming to this event.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. And I said I was out of questions, but I'm going to leave you with one more question. Does RouterOS version 8 exist yet?
That's the secret information. Sorry.
Okay. The new unicorn.
Goodbye.